Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Welcome to this session. I was gonna say, it sounds like a cliche, but it's true that I feel really honored and humbled to be able to share this session with the colleagues, professionals I know well, and I have researched in the past with them. And I think it's a session which is, I'm totally sure it has been a recurrent theme through the conference, and we all have been open education policies and open education practices. We have 2 sessions, each of them I think they are around 20 minutes each, 5 minutes for question and answer. I'm sure there will be a really insightful debate and through the chat. I think none of our speakers today, they really need a presentation, but without any further ado, I think I'm gonna give the floor to the first speakers, which are Leo Haberman, Javiera Atenas, which they are gonna present open education policy guidelines for co-creation. Leo and Javiera, all to you.
Hello, and thank you so much. I think Leo is sharing the screen. Thank you, Maricruz.
Thank you very much, Maricruz. It's so lovely to be here, especially compared with the 2 work meetings that I am missing in order to be here. Which it's what a crazy year. Normally by the time we reach the winter conference time of year, then things are beginning to be a bit more reasonable, but it just never has calmed down. So anyway, absolutely delightful to be here, and Javier and I are very excited to talk about our guidelines for co-creation of open education policies today, which we've only very kind of recently published and launched recently at the OE Global Conference. And in a way, this work, although it's definitely something that we were thinking about already and that is very kind of core to my current PhD research, this is also very much driven by the recent UNESCO recommendation on OER. I say recent, this actually came out in November of 2019, so it is now a year old. And UNESCO recommended, amongst other recommendations for kind of the mainstreaming and support of OER, that we, as member states and also as institutions within those, think about developing supportive policy for OER. And in response to this, Javier and I've been working with, amongst other things, with the OER World Map Policy Hub project, on collecting examples of policy and trying to sort of form communities of people who want to discuss policy making in open education. And through that work, we've also been in touch with a wider network of kind of open education organizations who are all interested in driving that issue forward. And one of the interesting things about this process has been the fact that we don't all have the same understanding of what open education is, and exactly what what kind of policy we even are proposing to create. And so one of the things that I think for us that was interesting in this mix of thinking about the topic of open education policies was, first of all, what does open education mean? It's not simply a question of resources, surely, but also of practices which can be sort of classed as open or regarded as open, practices which open up education in some kind of way. And we wanted to write about policies in a way that was inclusive of a wider sense than the OER that is so core and is so vital in the kind of open education movement, but is so core to the recommendation from UNESCO, but which in a sense the recommendation is very focused on that topic, and we wanted to go a bit wider. And we also thought, what is open education policy? There are different types of policy. It will occur at different levels, governmental, institutional. And then another big question for us was that very often people think they have a sort of instinctive reaction to the topic of policy, that it's sort of A, not interesting, or else that it's B, something that they don't want, because it's often perceived as something that constrains or sort of attempts to control what people do. And there is, in a larger sense, a danger simply that the people who make the policy may not be the people who are impacted by the policy, and they may be, you know, even with the best of intentions, it may be being imposed from above or from outside. And so that was also something that was very much on our minds when we started thinking about what sort of guidelines would we want to provide, what sort of guidelines would we need for this situation where we wouldn't claim that anybody has all the answers about what policy should say, about what exactly should be contained within it, because this all should be should be contextual and negotiated.
Yeah, one of the things that we look into with Leo when we start looking at how policies were being developed in the open education context, we look at like moving beyond the sort of mandate or way that open access to the policies, because they're quite standardized. So basically, you follow a template, because in the case of open education, it needs to be really contextual and have the culture of the institution and the country embedded within the design of the policy and the policy itself. So move beyond the idea of having templates that facilitate the creation of open education policies and OER policies more than anything.
So one of our first kind of tasks, or one of the first areas that we thought about, was really to define this concept of open education policy or policies. And so here's what we've come up with. That open education policies are written or unwritten guidelines, regulations and strategies. And one of the reasons that we wanted to highlight that it may be unwritten is because some of our kind of most influential thinkers on this topic have pointed out that policy can be courses of action that are kind of habitually, that, you know, the way that we do things in an organization, the way that we understand something, doesn't necessarily mean that there is a written document or a kind of a web page that says this is our policy. Obviously, it's very helpful when you're a researcher if there is such a such a policy document, I have to say, but there isn't always. So we wanted to highlight it may be also unwritten, but these should be guidelines, regulations, and strategies which seek to foster the development and implementation of open educational practices, including the creation and use of open educational resources. And it's through these policies that governments, institutions, or perhaps other organizations allocate resources and orchestrate activities in order to increase access to educational opportunity, as well as promote educational quality, efficiency, and innovation. So we hope that that is a helpful definition, at least for you to understand where we're coming from in terms of what these guidelines are about. And I'm sure, you know, whenever people propose a definition of something, there will be people who say, oh, I think it should include something else. So we're all, of course, very interested also in everyone's opinion on, you know, if there's aspects missing. But we hope that you find it a good start on this topic anyway. And so the next bit, before we wanted to actually talk a little bit more about the actual guidelines themselves, was to be a bit interactive, because that's always a bit more exciting than us just talking at you. And so for this purpose, we're going to drop into Mentimeter. Sorry, I'm just trying to operate the slides. Javier's put the link straight into the chat there.
I'm the magician's helper today, so here I'm doing.
The actual direct link, I think, should take you straight there.
Here's the code. I just pasted it.
There's also the code if you just go to menti.com and put in the code as well. So the first question we wanted to ask, so open vote, sorry, I didn't open voting. Now I have opened voting. Is it letting people vote now?
Yeah, so we want to ask you, do we need open education policies? Are these things really necessary? Or why should governments or institutions create policies relating with open education? So just have your say, because we're wondering if like we really need to have these policies, or we just can hide for the next 2 or 3 years and not do anything. But I hope it's not the case.
I think sometimes people think that the idea of policy, I kind of alluded to this earlier, is a constraining thing, and so that's why I chose this image that seemed to me to indicate someone that was not being constrained, someone that's quite free in their environment, and I thought, either the idea of policy could be working for that or working against it, depending on your perspective. So, okay, we've got a few responses in there. I think you can carry on, but I'm just going to see what we've got. Oh, fantastic!
Oh, brilliant!
Like to provide permission, I think is great. I think very often that there is really a lack of clarity on to what extent openness is permitted or endorsed in the organizations that people work in. Thank you, Lorna. I should have known. For equality, quite a few references to equality, empowerment. Oh, I like when it all rearranges. That's fun. Okay, so some lovely accessibility coming up there. Integrity. Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so I'm moving on to the next question. Who should be involved in creating open education policies? And this is really not specific to any particular context. Feel free to include anyone that you think should be involved.
I like this Menti thing. I like to create some words and word clouds.
This image wasn't as symbolic as the other one. It's just because there's various people in it.
People outside, which is something that we haven't done much in the last year. Like, oh, there's people outside. There is an outside. I miss the outside.
It's weird seeing people on television behaving as if life is normal. It's quite disturbing. Okay, just giving that another, I can see there's a few responses coming in, but another few seconds. And let's see what we've got. I think students is an excellent point. So often not consulted. Definitely, we can't go wrong by saying learning technologists in this group. And again, not always consulted on I think, on policy matters. People on the ground, that is very chiming with our thoughts. Each layer of power.
Yeah, the disenfranchised.
Broadest possible field. Right. All right, thanks everyone. I'm going to keep going because I'm just realizing that we could really like go over our time if we're not careful. And this one is an interesting one to us because we also think that policy should recognize people for doing this kind of practice, but in what kind of ways do you think that might work? Would you be happy just with a leaf? A leaf is nice.
Yeah, I could like.
But is it enough?
No, but this is in a way of another. When you attend all these big high policy meetings with these big world organizations, they always talk about recognition, and there is an issue there. Most of the people there is talking about open education policy at this very high level, don't teach or they don't have much academic experience or working in academia, and B, they don't understand very well the mechanisms of rewarding and recognizing the academic development, mostly like we're talking at HE sector. So this is something when it's always in the conversation. Oh, people should be recognized, and we need to recognize it, but they never tell you how. And when you ask them, they were like, well, next question. So we really need to hear from you. So next time we can tell in these meetings like, hey, you need to recognize X, Y, and Z. It's tricky. I love tricky questions, Lorna.
Gratefully, I like that.
Yeah, be grateful.
Emotion in both senses.
Yeah, but what is enable? Yeah, cool.
Publicized. A leaf would be nice. I thank you. I did think it was nice, so I'm glad somebody somebody liked it. Thanks very much for participating in these questions. I think that was fun and that was interesting to have your feedback, and we will return to these responses and ponder them some more.
Yeah, we'll come with some blog post at some point.
And let me just get back to our slide. And over to you, Javier.
So talking about gratefulness, we're really, really grateful and thankful for the help of a bunch of people that help us to put this co-creation guidelines together. So of course our co-authors, Jan Neumann and Cristina Stefanelli, but also Lorna and Catherine Cronin and Priscila Gonzalez from Educa Digital in Brazil, Igor from OI Global, Alvaro Ramirez from the University in Chile, Janrin Wetzler from Creative Commons, and Carolina Vega from the Open Education Working Group, but also she used to be OGP. So it's a bunch of people that kind of gave us their expertise to try to put a complex things, because the co-creation guidelines come in a way of another from all the co-creation process the Open Government Partnership does to co-create national action plans in regards with open data, transparency, and open governance. So we try to translate all this into co-creation guidelines for open education. So it wasn't an easy exercise, not even this year. So Leo, if you can forward. In a way of another, when we thought about how we can make, how we can kind of learn from what it's been done for quite a while now with open government and with open government partnerships, into making the governments to pledge to open up their data, to open up their information. So in regards to transparency laws, access to information, how we can bring all these elements and kind of work them towards co-creating open education policies. Because one of the things that we saw, it's what we mentioned before, some people kind of simplified the possibility of having like everything through a template or everything through a mandate. And in a way of another thing that the open education policy making is slightly more complex because it needs to be made in a transparent and participatory way. And because those that will be affected by the policy need to be involved in the decision-making process in a way to ensure co-ownership or shared ownership of the policy to ensure success. Because it's not just as mandatory and as simple as you publish in open access because the money that we're giving to you says that you have to publish in open access. That doesn't work with open education. A, because there normally is no money, and B, because there's no recognition. So how do we make this thing work in a collaborative way? Leo, could you please? So when we thought about how to develop a culture of openness through policy making, we thought about first, it's really important to harmonize open education within the national institution copyright and intellectual property regulations. Because if you have an open education policy that is basically copied from a template, but then you didn't look into what you can do or who owns the intellectual property in an institution, then normally there is a high level of high risk of derailment of the policy. You need to have an inclusive and participatory action plan. And designing an action plan, it needs to go beyond like senior management putting an open education policy together. There has to have an inclusive focus to a broader range of open education practices. So supporting innovation, anti-racism, decolonial approaches. So and also consider if it's going to be talking about open educational resources and open education platforms, because it's kind of digital environments. They need to have elements about data protection and data ethics to ensure that it goes beyond OER, that open education practices are inclusive and provide and care, support pedagogy of care. Leo?
Sorry, Javier, just to say
Yes.
to Martin, yes, I know we're kind of at time. Should we just carry on a couple more minutes?
Yeah, then, even one. We just can say,
we are
okay.
basically done.
No, I'm not seeing Catherine in the room, so.
Yeah, her laptop is restarting. She just sent us an text.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Her laptop decided to restart. She blames Microsoft.
So please conclude.
Yeah, thanks. What we think is like when a forum is organized to create policies, it needs to consider certain elements as copyright, innovation, accreditation, and credit transfer, capacity building, rewarding for open education, also data governance and practice. So I think, Leo, I think we can move to the last slide. Of course, you can download the guidelines for free, and if you want to talk about it with us, happy we can have workshops. Next year when we are allowed to travel, hopefully again, we have also a canvas to help organizations and a set of cards to help organizations to create policies. So if you want to chat with us, let's catch up after the holidays. Thank you so much, and here to have any questions, and while we wait for Catherine, because we're Catherine's fans, so we're not gonna go anywhere until she comes here.
Yes, no, yeah, that's true. Catherine might be off, cannot see, but I'm sure there was some comments within in the chat that you have followed, but if I may step in using my privilege, the presenter, I think you mentioned something, Leo, Javiera, who should be involved in the creation of open education policies, how this should be rewarded or recognized, the recognition. I think this is an interesting point regarding who should be involved, academic side, professional services, because Leo mentioned, obviously, we are in a conference of learning technologies, but sometimes learning technologies, how often we don't have the chance. We are champions of open education policies, but we are not being able to push this forward. Can I ask you, from your professional perspective, after researching into that so many years, who should be involved in those policies and what kind of recognition you think it should be? Many thanks.
I think that one of the things that we do sort of give, we kind of both say that this is an open question that can't be resolved by our advice, and also give then quite a long list of different people that we think ought to be involved. So I think that it's very much a contextual question as well, because also we need to think in terms of, you know, at what level are you making the policy, but certainly within a kind of an organizational context, like in a institution, I think it's really important actually to start the process by actually thinking through very carefully about who all the different stakeholders in this really are, and inviting representatives from all of those areas, because I think too often it's kind of assumed that we know who the key people are, or that you know, people that there are people who don't have an interest in it who perhaps do. I think one of the things I thought as well was interesting when in having students coming back in the responses to the Mentimeter, was that sometimes it's quite challenging to consult students about topics that we're not sure that they have much knowledge of, and I think that is one of the challenges, is also that then there's sort of a role in actually educating students about why the topic is important as well.
Okay, give me a second. I have Catherine here.
There was a. Is Catherine back? Martin, I cannot see yet in the room, and I think Lorna has the hand raised, and yeah, I can see Catherine. Yes, Lorna.
Hi there. Thanks, Maricruz, and thanks, Leo and Javiera. That was an excellent presentation. I think in terms of rewards for, or acknowledgement for,
sorry, hi, I have Catherine on the phone because her laptop decided to boycott her, so she will be speaking to you through my loudspeaker. Could you hear her? Can you hear her?
Okay, I think Lorna was making a point, yeah, and we can pass to Catherine, but okay, Lorna was just closing the session. Lorna, you were wanting to do a final remark.
You can hear. That's okay, I can just write in the chat, fine, it's okay. I'll pass the mic over to Catherine now.